Welcome to the second Opposition Day motion in the name of the Shadow Home Secretary on immigration. I inform the House that the Speaker has selected Amendment B in the name of the Prime Minister. Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move the motion standing in my name. For decades, the British people have demanded, and politicians have promised, dramatically lower immigration. And for decades, successive governments, including the last one, have failed to deliver that. This failure, over decades, has undermined faith and trust in democracy itself, and it is now time to end that failure. It is now time to deliver what the public wants, and that is why we have tabled an immigration and visa bill presenting a serious, credible plan to fix immigration issues. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, according to Ipsos last week, 67% of the British public think immigration is too high. The British public is right. There are now around 11 million foreign-born people in the UK, and for too long, immigration numbers have been far too high. Immigration at this level has serious consequences. 48% of social housing in London has a head of household not born in the UK. In the last 10 years, migration has absorbed around about 50% of new housing supply. And some nationalities are exceptionally dependent on social housing. For example, 72% of Somalis live in social housing, compared to only 16% of the population more generally. Now, yes, I'll give way.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I think he may have revealed something early on in his speech. He told us that now is the time for a serious and credible plan. Is he therefore admitting that in the 14 years his party was in government, there wasn't one serious or credible plan?
Correct. Well, I'll talk a bit in a moment about the record of the last government, but I've already said that for decades, under successive governments, including the last one, but previous ones as well, immigration has been far, far too high. That is a failure by governments over a period of decades, and it is now time to listen to the British people and put this right. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, high levels of immigration, especially when there is not proper integration, undermines social cohesion. And a nation-state, a society, can't function when you have social fractures. It can't function properly. The nation can't function properly. Society can't function properly when you have fractures in social cohesion. Over in a minute. And in advancing the case that we do have a problem with social cohesion and a lack of integration, I will present some evidence. It's not an assertion. I'll present some evidence in support of that. And let me start with this. The most recent census revealed that a million of our fellow citizens don't speak English at all or properly. In one part of East London, 73% of children do not speak English as their first language. And some nationalities have extremely low rates of economic activity, or very high rates of economic inactivity. So, for example, amongst people born in the Middle East and North Africa, economic inactivity rates are 40%. That is double the rate for people born in the UK. Amongst people born in South and East Asia, the economic inactivity rate is 50% higher than it is for people born in the UK. By contrast, amongst those born in Australia or New Zealand, the economic inactivity rate is only half the level amongst the UK-born population. And I'm afraid to say, when it comes to crime and offending, there are some immigrant groups where levels of criminality are very high. For example, Afghans are 20 times more likely to commit sex offenders than average. People of Congolese origin are 12 times more likely to commit violence, and Algerians are 18 times more likely to commit theft. So these figures, I will give way in just a moment, these figures illustrate that we do have a problem with integration, and that is why we need to get these numbers dramatically down until such time as we can address these issues. And let me now turn to the economy, because let me finish the point, then I will give way. Let me turn now to the economy. because it has long been thought that net migration is an unalloyed economic good. Indeed, that is one of the reasons why successive governments of both colours over some decades allowed immigration to get so high and to stay too high. But both governments, over many years, decades in fact, but recent analysis has shown this is simply not true. OBR analysis last year showed for the first time that low-wage migration actually costs the Exchequer money. There's not a net contribution, there's a net draw on the Exchequer. It costs other taxpayers money at low wage levels, and in particular where there are large numbers of dependents. And it has reduced per capita GDP, which affects the level of affluence enjoyed by the population here. And it is one of the reasons why productivity in our economy has flatlined for so long, because businesses have reached for mass low-skill migration instead of investing in technology, investing in automation, or simply becoming more productive. It's one of the reasons our productivity has flatlined. And that has all happened while 9 million of our fellow citizens of working age remain economically inactive. Now, many of those, of course, have caring responsibilities. Some genuinely can't work, and others are studying. But many of those 9 million, likely over half of those 9 million, could, and in my view, should be in the workforce instead of large numbers of low-wage, low-skill migrants being imported. So it is time for a different approach. We need to end the era of mass low-skilled migration and instead focus on small numbers of very high-skilled workers who should be welcomed. We need to invest more in technology, and we need to get more UK residents of working age into work, including by investing in training and including by reforming the welfare system. And I think somebody wanted to intervene over there, so I will give way.
I thank the member for giving way. When he's finished denigrating every community that's made their homes in this country, will he just reflect for a moment at the massive contribution made in education, in health, in transport and many other industries by people that have come to this country? When he goes to a hospital, does he criticise those people that have come from another country and are working in our hospitals, looking after us and our health services, or is he only interested in just denigrating people because they were born speaking a different language and they look different to him?
I think the right honourable gentleman was listening very carefully. I expressly said that high-skill migrants do make a contribution and should be welcomed. And when I was talking about those issues with social housing, with economic inactivity, with criminality, I was reading out facts. I was reading out data, published data by the census, by the ONS. Those are facts. He may not like the facts, but they are facts nonetheless. I will give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable gentleman, the member for Burnley, just said from a sedentary position that my right honourable friend was race baiting, when my right honourable friend was simply reading out official statistics in contribution to an important debate about the future of our country. Does my right honourable friend think that the honourable gentleman should stand up and put his views on the record and tell his constituents what he thinks about their legitimate concerns?
I think he should do that because the British public have expressed very clear views on this. And if we can't, in this House of all places, lay out the facts, publish data as a way of having an honest debate about this issue, then I don't know where we've got to. And in fact, it is that kind of shouting down, saying that it's somehow beyond the pale to discuss these facts, is precisely how we ended up in this mess in the first place. Now let me come on to some of the steps taken late in the time of the last government. Steps they took which, yes, they were too late. Yes, they were too late. That's right. Taken late in the time of the last government, which took effect in April 2023 and in April 2024. Those steps included preventing social care workers and students bringing dependents and increasing various salary thresholds. Now, the official forecasts published by bodies like the ONS and the OBR show that net migration, thanks to those measures, is forecast to reduce by 500,000 compared to the peak, and those measures are already having an effect. If you compare visas issued in the second half of last year compared to the second half of 2022, you will see Madam Deputy Speaker. A reduction in social care visas of 76%, a reduction in student visas of 21%, a reduction in student-dependent visas of 89%, and a reduction in skilled worker visas, many of whom were not in fact skilled, by 45%. But the truth is, we need to go further. And the government white paper published last Monday does not go far enough. On the Laura Kuenssberg programme the Sunday before last, the Home Secretary said it would only have an impact of 50,000 on net migration. The numbers accompanying the white paper said 100,000. But whichever number you take, that is only between 1/10 and 1/5 of the impact of the measures taken by the last government. It simply doesn't go far enough. So a question I've got for the Immigration Minister, and she's welcome to intervene if she'd like to, or answer in her speech. The last government set out a plan to increase the salary threshold for family visas up to £38,000 that was due to take effect on the 1st of April this year, just 7 or 8 weeks ago. The new government suspended that measure, which will obviously have the effect of increasing immigration. So will the government implement that increased threshold as set out by the last government? As I said, the measures in the white paper go nowhere near far enough. We have set out a detailed plan. Yes, I will.
Does he share my concerns that not only are their measures inadequate, but they're potentially opening a big new route for inward migration? On the weekend, the Paymaster General suggested that the youth mobility or youth experience scheme with the EU was comparable to the one we have with Uruguay. That is 500 visas a year. We read in the papers today that the EU is asking for hundreds of thousands of youth visas. Is he concerned, as I am, that this actually could be a backdoor for a new route of very substantial migration?
Yes, I do agree with my honourable friend. This could create an enormous new loophole. There are potentially around 60 million people in the UK eligible for this visa route, and we have no idea at all where a cap may be. The Leader of the Opposition asked the Prime Minister just a couple of days ago what a numerical cap might be. The Prime Minister characteristically did not answer the question. There are also no answers on the question of whether people coming over on this scheme could claim benefits, no answer as to the question of whether they could bring dependents, and some European countries grant citizenship to illegal immigrants just 3 years after getting asylum, and they would then be eligible to come as well. So it seems to me this route could create an enormous loophole in our asylum system. Go on.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think it's really important that the Honourable Gentleman clarify something to actually aid this debate. I've read his motion carefully. The vast majority of the motion in front of the House today is about illegal migration. And repeatedly, it feels like the issue of illegal migration and legal migration is being conflated as the same issue. That doesn't help the debate, and I wonder whether he could clarify if that's his intention.
Well, I intend to talk about both. I've been talking about legal migration so far. I'm going to come in a moment to illegal migration. But since he has raised the question of the bill that we tabled, one of the measures in that speaks directly to the question of legal migration. The numbers have been far too high for decades. The only way this House, this democratically elected House, can get a handle on this is that if we have an annual binding vote in Parliament to set a cap on the level of legal migration, so that when the cap is reached, when that number of visas have been issued, the government would simply stop issuing any new visas. That way, never again would we see a situation where migration numbers end up being far higher than expected. This House would decide, this democratically elected House would decide. It would be transparent, it would be open, and the level could be set at a number far, far lower than anything we have seen in recent history. And yet, when we put this to a vote last Monday, as an amendment to the border bill, the party opposite voted against this measure that would give Parliament the power at last to limit inward migration. I call on the government to think again, and to support our bill, which provides Parliament with those powers. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn now to the question of illegal migration, since the member opposite has invited me to do so. and it would be churlish not to respond to an invitation of that kind. Now, let me start by the main vector, the main mode of illegal immigration into this country, it's not the only one, but the main one is small boats crossing the Channel. Now, the first point to make is there is no reason at all for anyone at all, no matter their circumstances, to cross into the UK by small boat from France, because France is a safe country. France has a well-functioning asylum system. There is no war going on in France. No one is being persecuted in France. You do not need to get into a rubber dinghy to flee from Calais. Not a single one of those people coming across need to do so for reasons of fleeing persecution. They should claim asylum in France. Now, the government's record on this area is lamentable. They came to office last July, cancelling the Rwanda scheme before it even started. The amendment, by the way, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the name of the Prime Minister and Secretary of State, is grossly misleading. It describes the Rwanda scheme as being, quotes, in force. The Rwanda scheme was never in force. It didn't start. It wasn't due to start until the 24th of July. So this amendment is deeply misleading. Now the new government last July set out their alternative plan. Their alternative plan was to, quote, smash the gangs. Now, how's that going? Well, since the election, about 37,000 people have illegally crossed the Channel. That is a 30% increase on the same period 12 months prior. Let me just make the point. And this year so far, 2025, has been the worst year ever, the worst year in history for illegal Channel crossings. And today, as we speak, in this House, today is going to be the worst day this year for Channel crossings. An observer in Dover has so far counted today 820 illegal immigrants arriving in Dover, making this the worst day of the year so far. The plan to smash the gangs is in tatters. It is not working, and that is why, far from closing down asylum hotels, as the government promised to do, they are opening them up. There are 8,000 more asylum hotels as of December 31st than there were a year before, of course.
Very much for giving way. I wonder if you'd take a moment just to reflect and remember the woman and small child who lost their lives today in an incident in French territorial waters.
Yes, of course I would. A number of people have tragically lost their lives crossing the Channel, and that is precisely why we need to stop these crossings entirely, as Australia did about 10 years ago. If we can stop these crossings entirely, then lives won't be put needlessly at risk, and we can avoid tragedy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say I'm disgusted by the narrative coming from the party in opposition, who are continuing, even in opposition, to use their Opposition Day debate to scapegoat migrants for their own 14 years of failure to deliver proper public services, tackle inequality, tackle poverty in this country that have led to many of the problems he listed. But now that he's moved on to tackling small boats, will he not acknowledge that without providing safe and regulated routes for people to claim asylum, they are pushed into the hands of people smugglers? Does he not acknowledge the most rational as well as compassionate thing to do would be to provide those safe and managed routes?
No, well, firstly, no, I don't accept that. Firstly, every single person getting on one of those boats is able to claim asylum in France. They don't need to get into one of those boats to claim asylum in the UK. Secondly, unless every single person that wants to come into the UK is given a safe and legal route, those people who aren't given a place on what would presumably be a capped scheme would nonetheless try to cross by small boats. So the idea that this is a solution to small boat crossings is manifestly absurd. Now, there are, of course, safe and legal routes, some that have been set up specifically, like the Ukrainian scheme, like the British Nationals Overseas scheme, like the UK resettlement scheme, which saw 25,000 people from Syria resettled here, like the Arak and Arab schemes in relation to Afghanistan, like the refugee family reunion route. There are plenty of safe and legal routes. And as I say, unless every single person that wants to come here is given a safe and legal route, there will still be illegal crossings, which are anyway unnecessary because France is safe and people are able to claim asylum there. Now, Madam, I will make some progress. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government's amendment makes reference to their border bill, and the obvious truth is that their border bill is not going to make a great deal of difference. It creates a border security commander. Now, I know Martin Hewitt, and I've got every respect for Martin Hewitt, but the border security commander has no powers. All they have in this bill are functions, and the functions include things like preparing an annual report and publishing a strategic priority document. Now, with all due respect to the Immigration Minister, I don't think the people smugglers are going to be very concerned by an annual report or a strategic priority document. Now, the so-called anti-counter-terror powers in this bill amount to things like confiscating mobile phones and using slightly enhanced surveillance tactics on the criminal gangs. The truth is, it's a tiny step in the right direction, but the truth is it will make no difference because, as the National Crime Agency has said, law enforcement alone is not going to fix this problem. Because if you dismantle one gang, another will simply pop up in its place. That's what the National Crime Agency assessed a year or two ago. Now, we do know what worked in Australia, who had an even bigger problem than us about 10 years ago. Around about 50,000 people were crossing to Australia. They set up Operation Sovereign Borders, which entailed a removals deterrent. They used Nauru rather than Rwanda. But in a matter of a few months, and only a few thousand people being removed there, the illegal maritime crossings to Australia stopped entirely. It went down to zero because the deterrent effect meant that people in Indonesia didn't even attempt the crossing in the first place. And because those crossings were stopped, hundreds and hundreds of lives were saved. So it is clear to me that we do need a removals deterrent, like Rwanda, in order to prevent these crossings.
My own friend for giving way. I went to visit Rwanda and I was very impressed by the facilities that were being built there for the migrants that were due to go. Does he agree with me that had the Rwanda scheme not been cancelled by the current government, that the people who'd gone there would be being cared for and setting up new and successful lives, and we would not have people dying in the Channel?
Yes, I completely agree, and I commend my honourable friend for having gone there to look at the facilities. Yes, had that scheme been started as intended on the 24th of July, the deterrent effect would by now have stopped these crossings. And in fact, the UNHCR themselves send people to Rwanda, so that it's clearly good enough for them. Other countries, including Germany, are now looking at removals deterrents. And so it is quite clear the government should restart a proper removals deterrent, and I urge them urgently to do so. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have presented a bill to this House which contains serious and credible measures to limit legal migration and to take action against illegal migration and to make sure people with no right to be here are removed, including foreign national offenders. And one of the most important measures is to repeal the Human Rights Act in relation to immigration matters, because over the years, UK judges in the Immigration Tribunal have adopted ever more expansive definitions of ECHR articles to allow dangerous foreign criminals to remain in this country. There are, in fact, thousands of examples of the definitions of these articles, not just Article 8, but Article 3 as well, being stretched and stretched and stretched over the years, beyond any definition of common sense, certainly beyond anything contemplated by the framers of the ECHR 70 or so years ago. That is why that Human Rights Act has to be repealed, so Parliament decides what the rules are, not judges applying expansive interpretations. I'll give just one example. There was a Zimbabwean paedophile who fell for deportation back to Zimbabwe, but a judge, using, I think, Article 3, not Article 8, said no, that paedophile could not be sent back to Zimbabwe in case he faced some hostility back in Zimbabwe. Well, what about the rights of children in the United Kingdom to be protected from paedophiles like that? What about the rights of British citizens to be protected from these foreign national offenders? That is why we need to repeal the Human Rights Act in relation to immigration matters. That is why it is in our bill, and I call on the government to support it. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is time to deliver what the British public want. This side of the House has developed a credible and detailed bill to do that, and I call on the government, if they're serious, to support it.
The question is, as on the order paper, I call Angela Eagle to move the amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I note that this motion begins by regretting the fact that we are 20 weeks into this year and more than 12,000 people have crossed the channel by small boat. And let me start on a note of consensus. I agree with him. Numbers are too high, and I agree that they must come down. And I'm going to come on to the action that we are taking to achieve this aim. But first of all, I must address what we in Merseyside would call the Shadow Home Secretary's brass neck. What he didn't say in his speech was that in the last 20 weeks when he was Immigration Minister, it wasn't 12,000 people who crossed in the Channel, it was 13,000. It wasn't 230 small boats that made the crossing, as we've had so far this year. During his last 20 weeks in charge, it was almost 500. Where was his motion of regret then? And where were his expressions of outrage then? In fact, let me tell you just how bad it was in his last 20 weeks in charge, from the end of April 2021 up to the middle of September. More people crossed the Channel by small boats in those 20 weeks than the previous 40 months put together, all the way back to the start of the crossings in 2018. 173 weeks worth of crossings, and he managed to get them exceeding that total in his last 20 weeks in charge. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, that was not his only claim to fame during his period in office, because he was the minister in charge when net migration started to run completely out of control. In the 19 months that he was in charge, net migration rose from, when I finished my sentence, net migration, when he was in charge in the Home Office, net migration rose from 170,000 to 470,000, a 300,000 increase in less than 2 years. Of course, I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I think the Honourable Lady should correct the record. I never had ministerial responsibility for legal migration, so I'd be grateful if she would withdraw that.
Yeah, I'm sure you can stick to it.
Collective responsibility apparently never used to matter to the party opposite, but I think if we actually remember some of the history, we'll know that that was actually true. Because I want you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and everyone else in the House to cast all your minds back to the summer of 2022 and the 20 weeks period between when Chris Pincher had his night at the Carlton Club, all the way through to 20 weeks later when Jeremy Hunt had to have an emergency budget. The Conservative government descended into utter chaos with 3 different Prime Ministers and 4 different Home Secretaries who took turns in office. What was happening to small boats in the Channel during that particular 20 weeks of arrivals? Not 12,000 arrivals, not 13,000 arrivals, 30,000 arrivals. No, in the space of 20 weeks. Not 220 boats, not 500 boats, 670 boats. And why did that happen, Madam Deputy Speaker? Because they were all too busy fighting amongst themselves and crashing the economy to bother about protecting our borders. And let's not forget the role that the Shadow Home Secretary actually played in that little bit of Conservative Party history. In the space of 20 weeks, he went from Tech Minister to No Minister, to Chief Secretary to the Treasury, to Paymaster General, to Police Minister. But none of this was his most important role, because we should remember... No.
Order. The Minister will be heard. Minister.
20-week periods, which feature in the party opposite's motion. I'm talking about what happened in 20 weeks. When, just to go back over it, the Shadow Home Secretary went from Tech Minister to not having a job, to Chief Secretary, to Paymaster General, to Police Minister. They brought the sort of chaos to government that they brought to the immigration policy that they had control over for 14 years. No, because I'm going to make some of these points. Because we should all remember Madam Deputy Speaker, we should all remember that the Shadow Home Secretary was once credited being the economic guru behind Liz Truss's premiership. This is the man who helped Liz Truss write her catastrophic mini-budget off a cliff and scuppered her own premiership. And now...
Point of order, Dr Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The history lesson of who was which minister in which government when is obviously all available on the internet if people wanted to look. But how does it relate to the matter in discussion today, which is about what the current government is doing to tackle migration?
I thank the honourable lady for her point of order, and I look forward to hearing her views in the debate later. Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think that it's perfectly reasonable to point out the chaos that 14 years of Conservative government and the current shadow Foreign Secretary's record in these areas. Let me finish the sentence. No, I'm not giving way. I'm not giving way. I think it's perfectly reasonable to point out the record of the party opposite when they come and try to give us lectures about immigration policy and what should be done with migration policy now when we are clearing up their mess. Now, this government inherited a system in total chaos from the party opposite, and partially that was from the chaos that I've just talked about in those 20 weeks between the Pincher visit to the Carlton Club and the budget that had to clear up Liz Truss's mess, when we had 3 Prime Ministers and 4 Home Secretaries. Can the party opposite seriously pretend to the British people that while they were busy doing all that, they had a coherent migration policy that they can lecture us about? No, I don't think so. I'm happy to give way to the honourable gentleman now because he stood up when I got to the end of a sentence.
Great, forward to me. And now I know for that formally, I look forward to being able to intervene in the future. When it comes to clarity on policy, I'd be grateful for help for the current Prime Minister's clarity on policy, because in 2020 he wrote a letter saying he's defending migrants' rights and make a positive case for immigration. Yet in his recent speech he talked about crafting an island of strangers. Could she provide clarity on which of the two it is he believes when it comes to immigration policy?
Really important that we all remember when we're talking about migration policy, net migration, immigration, be it legal or illegal, that we are talking about human beings and that we should treat them as human beings and that all human beings have human rights. We should not actually perpetrate narratives that dehumanise people. And too often, let me finish the sentence, too often the party opposite, or some of the parties opposite, not all of them, actually perpetrate a narrative that is increasingly dangerous. Let us not dehumanise fellow human beings. I give way to the honourable gentleman. No.
Lady. And I recognised how it is very important that we use temperate language, but my honourable friend was very clear in not... He just set out 2 factual statements of what the Prime Minister said with an interval between them. But I think she must acknowledge that the public mood has changed significantly in very recent times. And the purpose of this debate today is to scrutinise the government's record in its 10 months in office and to see how effective those interventions have been. And I think it's perfectly legitimate to be asked about the characterisation that her Prime Minister has made very recently about this matter.
Minister. I think that the 2 quotes are incompatible with each other. We have to have, and our white paper sets out the route forward to that, net migration coming down compared to the legacy that we've inherited from the party opposite, which was to quadruple it in 4 short years. And I think it's important also to remember that when we're talking about legal migration and net migration, we have to have integration, we have to have capacity to absorb the people that we allow into our country. And crucially, when it comes to small boats, we have to have the capacity to decide who comes into our country. So I don't see that either of those 2 statements from the Prime Minister years apart are actually incompatible. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm happy to give way.
like to thank the Minister. Can I commend her for her words in terms of we're talking about people? Now, recently in a debate in this place, I referenced Lord Alf Dubs. And what he said was, I said he'd said it was outrageous, he didn't. He said that the Prime Minister's words were regrettable. Now, what I'd like to hear, does she think, and I was wrong with that, does she realise that words matter when we're talking about people? We can have different views on migration policy, but we're talking about people. So I commend those words that she's used just now, and I would encourage other members of the government to do likewise.
I thank the honourable gentleman. I think that it's very important to remember that we thrive, like we always have in our history, with a tolerant, multicultural society now, where we strive to understand each other and get on with each other rather than divide and seek to cause resentments, which some people have political narratives that do that, and that is all regrettable. I'm happy to
thank the Minister for giving way. This is clearly a very emotive debate on all sides of the House, and it's probably a good time to acknowledge that in the NHS, you're more likely to be treated by an immigrant working for the NHS than you are to be waiting behind an immigrant for treatment. And so despite the rhetoric that has been promoted by many politicians over the last few years, especially those that would champion Brexit, we should probably acknowledge that the NHS wasn't being crippled by immigration, as being sustained by it.
I think that it's important that all of us acknowledge, first of all, the humanity of people who come to our country to work, and also the contribution that they make. But we also have to have rules, and we have to decide ourselves who comes to our country and why, and we have to explain those rules to the electorate, and that is what I will go on to try and do. We inherited a system in total chaos from the party opposite. They allowed criminal gangs to take hold across the Channel, which saw numbers arriving rocket from 300 in 2018 to over 30,000 in a few years. They crashed the asylum system with a 70% drop in monthly decision-making in the run-up to the election and an 80% drop in asylum interviews. There was a 34% drop in returns compared to the last Labour government, and they spent £700 million sending 4 volunteers to Rwanda. Their handling of legal immigration was no better. Net migration quadrupled in the space of just 4 years to nearly 1 million. That is their record. Those records tell a wretched story of a system spiralling out of control, of an entire criminal industry building up along our borders with terrible consequences, of ruthless smugglers sending desperate people on dangerous and sometimes deadly journeys and making a fortune in the process, of basic rules not being enforced, and of a collapse of trust and confidence in the state's ability to perform one of its most fundamental functions, to keep our borders safe and secure. Now, so bad was their record that the public simply stopped believing anything they said. And who can blame them? For all the talk about stopping the boats and stopping all of this crisis, the crisis carried on. Unsurprisingly, strong words and grotesquely expensive gimmicks make little impact against sophisticated smuggling networks. The task of ending this chaos falls to this government. I'm happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
Minister, for giving way. She knows that I've long believed that this government is harbouring its own ambition for a Rwanda scheme, and this seemed to start with the returned hubs in Albania. That now seems to have been rejected by the Albanian government. Is she any further plans to introduce some sort of son of Rwanda on behalf of her government?
When we came to office, we ended the Rwandan scheme. The Rwandan scheme was about deporting people and processing their asylum in another country and never letting them back here. Therefore, but it didn't work. It didn't work. The Honourable...
Order. I want to hear what the Minister's got to say. And certainly my constituents and all our constituents want to hear what the Minister's got to say. Minister.
The party opposite, which very conveniently called an early election so the Rwanda scheme would never start, after spending years saying even perpetrating the idea of a Rwandan scheme would actually stop the boats, know as well as I do that over 84,000 people crossed the channel in small boats in the years that the Rwanda scheme was put into effect and put into law to when it was actually abolished. Now, they can sit there and say that after all... No, they can sit there. They can sit there. They can sit there after all this effort and after all these gimmicks and pretend to the British people and pretend to the people in this House that the Rwanda scheme was just ready to go and it would have worked perfectly if only their government had staggered on to the 24th of June. But nobody believes them because it was a flawed scheme from the start, it wasn't a deterrent, it didn't work, and it was massively expensive. Now, since the general... No, I've given way enough, and I'm going to carry on and make these points because we have quite a small time. Since the general election, we have established the Border Security Command to draw together the work of all relevant agencies, supported by at least £150 million of extra funding this year. We've backed UK law enforcement to play a leading role in major international operations to take out the gangs and their supply chains further up the smuggling routes. We've deepened cooperation with key allies, including France. We've struck new agreements with Germany, Iraq, Italy, the Calais Group and the G7. We've hosted a major international summit on border security, the first of its kind with over 40 countries in attendance. And we've transferred the staff and resources from the failed Rwanda scheme and used them to return more than 24,000 individuals with no right to be in the UK. We've increased asylum decision-making by 52% in the last 3 months to 2024, and we have ramped up illegal working enforcement visits and arrests, by 40%. But as we've made clear consistently, this is just the start. We need to go further, and we will. I'm going further. Would you give way? No. There are two main factors that make today's challenges different from the past, Madam Deputy Speaker. First, technology. The physical distances between nations and continents may not have changed, but the near universality of smartphones and internet access has made the world feel a lot smaller. For the gangs, they can organise journeys more quickly and more easily than ever before. And for the people they prey on, the promise of a different future is right there on the screen of a mobile device. The second factor is the emergence of a ruthless criminal industry worth billions of pounds stretching across borders and across continents. On illegal migration and border security, we are acting to get a grip on issues that have gone unchecked for far too long. For years, the ringleaders and facilitators of this trade have been able to evade justice by ensuring that they're not present when money changes hands or the boats set off. To shift the dial, we need action to be taken earlier and faster. We need a response befitting the scale and urgency of the threat, and to mount such a response, we need to legislate. Having intensified activity across policy, operational and international arenas since the general election, we've moved to strengthen the law by bringing forward the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill. The House is well acquainted with the bill, but its core aims and measures bear repeating. The bill puts an end to the failed gimmicks of the past. It furnishes law enforcement with counter-terrorism-style tactics to strike against smuggling gangs earlier and faster, long before they get within striking distance of our shores. And these were the tactics that the National Crime Agency and their associates who help us with this work asked for us to change the law to provide them with. The bill introduces new powers to seize electronic devices and new offences covering the sale and handling of small boat parts for use in illegal activities. It upgrades serious crime prevention orders to target individuals involved in organised immigration crime. It creates a new offence of endangering life at sea to act as a deterrent against small boat overcrowding and send an unambiguous message that we're ready to take action against those who are complicit in fatalities in the Channel. I talk about fatalities in the Channel. They laugh and joke amongst themselves. It's an interesting thing.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and for the roar of what is no doubt enthusiasm from about to ask. This week, this government signed a deal with the European Union that includes, amongst other things, the ability to find out, for example, if someone has been arrested in another European country for people smuggling, or, for example, the ability to use facial recognition technology. Does she agree with me that these are exactly the sort of tactics that one would need if one wishes to smash the gangs, and yet the party opposite opposed it?
I agree with my honourable friend, and of course the party opposite oppose all of the border security bill, despite the fact that they say, well, you voted against it. They sit there and say it's not true, but they voted against the bill. Now, I don't know in what world why the opposition should have voted against a bill which gives more powers to deal with organised immigration crime internationally. Now, second, I'll give way to him.
Well, to the Minister, as always, I'm listening very carefully to what she has to say. Has she been listening to the National Crime Agency? Because the National Crime Agency has said very clearly that whilst a lot of the things that the Minister has just outlined are important, nevertheless, it's missing one thing, and that is deterrence. Yeah. Could she explain where in her measures deterrence features?
Well, the National Crime Agency haven't said that about the Borders Bill. In fact, if the honourable gentleman had been listening to the evidence that we got during the evidence sessions at the beginning of the parliamentary consideration of the bill, he would have seen some very good evidence from the NCA itself supporting the parts of the bill that give counter-terrorism powers and prevention powers, and being enthusiastic about the increased opportunities for enforcement and successful enforcement that this bill gives. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will turn to legal migration. Through the plans in our immigration white paper, we will deliver a system that supports our efforts to reduce net migration and backs British talent. As the Home Secretary set out in the House last week, our approach is founded on 5 core principles. First, that net migration must come down. Second, that the migration system should be linked to skills and training domestically so that no industry or sector can rely solely on overseas recruitment. That is a major failure of the last government's 14 years in office. Third, that the system must be fair and effective, with clearer rules in areas such as respect for family life and stronger safeguards against perverse outcomes that undermine public confidence. Fourth, that this country's laws must be respected and enforced, from cracking down on illegal working to deporting foreign criminals. And fifth, the system must support integration and community cohesion. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not a task that can be completed overnight, and clearing up the opposition's legacy is not going to be easy because of the chaos we inherited from the party opposite. Record net migration, record small boat arrivals and record numbers of asylum hotels. Criminal smugglers left to run amok for years. Public confidence shaken by past failures, expensive gimmicks and broken promises. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's been left to this government to clear up this mess and turn the page on the chaos and failures of the past, and that work has begun.
The original question was as on the order paper, since when Amendment B has been proposed as on the order paper. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. Before I call the Lib Dem spokesperson, I would like to make it clear there will be a 5-minute time limit for the backbench speeches. Dr. Al Pinkerton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Conservatives want to talk about immigration today, and I'm delighted to start by talking about their record in government. Though I should warn this House, calling it a record may be overly generous. A record, after all, implies coherence, consistency and competence. What we've witnessed instead is a decade of headline-chasing gimmicks, theatrical tough talk, performative cruelty and policy U-turns so dizzying they could give a weather vane whiplash. But let's start with the basics. As the Shadow Home Secretary has already confessed, the Conservatives promised again and again to bring immigration down. That was in 2015, in 2017, then in 2019, and then they promised the same thing in 2024, when the British public, in their infinite wisdom, told the Conservatives to go back to their constituencies and prepare for a period of quiet reflection. Spoiler alert, Madam Deputy Speaker, they didn't just miss those targets, they incinerated them. And at the time of the last election, when the Conservatives wanted to stand on their record, net migration was at the highest in British history. Not just high, not just elevated, but record-breaking. And what was their grand response? Rwanda. Yes, Rwanda, a deportation scheme that cost £500 million and moved precisely 0 people. A stunt so hollow it made the policy vacuum look crowded. A triumph of symbolism over substance, if ever there was one. And throughout it all, we heard the same tired refrain from the Home Office lectern from which the Right Honourable gentleman who opened today's debate used to speak, that immigration somehow threatens our identity. This from a government that relied utterly and shamelessly on migrant workers to prop up every sector they spent a decade undermining: the NHS, social care, higher education, farming. If hypocrisy were an export, the Tories would have been running a trade surplus. No, thank you. The Honourable Gentleman's party had 9 years. I've got less than 9 minutes. Meanwhile, the legal migration rules became so convoluted that even seasoned immigration lawyers needed to phone a friend. Skilled workers were welcomed one week, penalised the next. International students encouraged to come, then punished for having families. The only thing consistent in Conservative policy was chaos. And all of this wrapped in a layer of chest-beating, slogan-touting nationalism. Take back control, they cried, as if chanting it loudly enough might somehow make it true. But control, Madam Deputy Speaker, is not about standing on the shoreline like King Canute barking orders at the tide. It's about building a system that actually works, one that treats people with dignity, balances compassion with pragmatism, and delivers results instead of rhetoric. Instead, what did we get? An asylum system on its knees. Trafficking gangs operating with near total impunity, and most tragically, lives lost in the Channel. Just this Monday, 62 people were rescued after a small boat sank in the early hours. One person died. Others were injured, and this, of course, is not an anomaly. According to the BBC, over 12,500 people have crossed the Channel in small boats this year, and it's only May. And the Labour response so far? Muted ambition, I would argue, vague promises and a nervous tiptoeing around the institutional wreckage, as if managerial competence alone might magic away a decade of Conservative failures. The Liberal Democrats are clear. These crossings must stop. But unlike the Conservatives, we don't confuse cruelty with competence. We believe in expanding safe and legal routes for refugees.
Would you give way on that point?
No, I won't. Including humanitarian travel permit that offers vulnerable people a viable alternative to risking their lives at sea. We also believe we also believe the real way to tackle the Channel crisis is through stronger cooperation. That means working through Europol to dismantle trafficking networks, share intelligence, deliver joint enforcement and report progress back to Parliament every 6 months. And it means a statutory duty for the UK's border commander to meet their Europol counterpart at least once every 3 months. I will give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Very grateful to the Lib Dem spokesman giving way. He said safe and legal routes and he said numbers. On that basis, could he give us the numbers and which countries he thinks he would open up for? Pragmatically, how many routes would he open up?
How many people?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We need safe and legal routes. We need safe and legal routes in order to allow people an alternative to putting their lives at risk to cross the Channel. And this needs to be done on a continental basis, working with our European partners. I will now make progress. No, thank you. We believe that European cooperation, as I have just indicated, is the answer, no thank you, to the small boats crisis. And even the Shadow Home Secretary agrees with me. We all heard his comments that the UK's withdrawal from the Dublin Agreement as part of Boris Johnson's botched Brexit deal meant that the UK can't any longer rely on sending people back to the place where they first claimed asylum. Straight from the horse's mouth. And let's talk about the backlog. At the end of 2024, around 91,000 asylum seekers were stuck in limbo. Most had been waiting over 6 months just for an initial decision. And while they wait, they're banned from working, forced to depend entirely on the state. And that, of course, becomes a source of resentment for local communities whose discontentment can be weaponised by the darker fringes of our political spectrum. That's why my honourable friend, the member for Hazel Grove, tabled an amendment to allow asylum seekers waiting more than 3 months to work. It's humane because... Sorry, forgive me. I have them. It's humane, it's pragmatic, and it would help to grow the economy. The Conservatives failed to address that injustice for a decade, and Labour have also failed to grasp the nettle since. It's disappointing that both parties voted against that sensible policy, which would have ensured those asylum seekers paid their own way. I will give way to the Honourable Lord.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. He's making a very interesting speech, and he's talked about the importance of safe and legal routes, of which there are several at the moment. But does he accept that if those safe and legal routes are not capped to some extent, there will still be people for whom there is not a safe and legal route, who may then risk their lives in the Channel?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think what we have to also recognise is that safe and legal routes is one mechanism that needs to be pursued. So does international aid, allowing people to stay broadly in the regions from which they may otherwise be displaced. We often forget, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Jordan has the highest number of refugees of any country in the world. The Conservatives failed to address that particular injustice for a decade, and Labour have also failed to grasp that nettle. Madam Deputy Speaker, we welcome the Government's attempt to address the wreckage left by the previous government, but let's be clear, any new immigration policy must come with a credible action plan for filling vital jobs without harming the economy. Let's start with higher carers' minimum wage, because right now our social care sector is in crisis. There simply aren't enough workers. Millions of people are missing out on essential care. Instead of properly investing in the British workforce, the Conservatives chose the short-term fix. Underpaid overseas workers propping up an underfunded system. Now, with those workers being squeezed from all sides, many care homes are at breaking point, and families are being left to pick up the pieces. And it's disappointing that Labour's national insurance increases are only adding to the pressure in that sector, and the Government's recent immigration announcements look set to disproportionately hit the care sector as well. Let me be absolutely clear. The people who've come to Britain to care for our elderly and disabled are not the problem. They are vital to this country and the well-being of some of the most vulnerable people in our society. They deserve our thanks, they deserve our respect, not to be demonised by those who failed to pay British workers properly in the first place. And finally, I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he makes an interesting point there about those who help us. Following a complicated pregnancy, my wonderful daughter was birthed at the Oxford John Radcliffe Hospital by a team which comprised English, Spanish, Indian, Italian and South African experts. So will he join me in thanking those immigrants who do bring so much to our country and help us when we need it?
Yeah. I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I was recently also in my local hospital and I had an extraordinary care experience from a multinational care team. I celebrate all of those NHS workers who have come to serve us all from overseas. And finally, let me turn to one of our greatest national assets, our universities. As a recovering academic who spent more than 20 years in higher education, I've seen firsthand how international students enrich our campuses, strengthen our soft power and boost our economy. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. We've both spent part of our careers teaching at universities, and we have to acknowledge that the university funding troubles at the moment are very much propped up by foreign students paying tuition fees, which actually help subsidise the cost for British students.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his comments, and I will actually come on and make that point about the state of the finances of UK universities. Universities are magnets for global talent, and they are the envy of the world. So why is this particular government so determined to undermine that? The new immigration white paper limits international graduates to just 18 months in the UK after their studies. It's a short-sighted, self-defeating policy that's already caused alarm in the sector. I've heard from university vice-chancellors warning of financial catastrophe and a collapse in international recruitment. The Russell Group has also been clear. International students drive local economies, fund research and help make Britain a science superpower. Higher education is the #1 export for 26 parliamentary constituencies, and among the top 3 in 102. We jeopardise that at our peril. And as if that weren't enough, now there's talk of a levy on international student fees, because apparently what our universities really need in the middle of a funding crisis and challenging international recruitment environment is a brand new tax. Madam Deputy Speaker, this feels reckless, and we would strongly encourage the Government to think again, to work with the university sector to flesh out those proposals in a way that works for both the country and the university sector. The Liberal Democrats will always stand for an immigration system that's fair, firm and forward-looking, one that supports the economy, reflects our values and honours Britain's proud tradition of offering sanctuary to those in need. The Conservative Party today wanted to shine a light on immigration, but when we look at their record, what we see is a decade of chaos, cruelty and catastrophic incompetence. I congratulate them on their courageous decision.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start by being very clear about what I believe and what I know my constituents in Hartlepool believe? Immigration, whether legal or illegal, is far too high. There is nothing right-wing or indeed racist about being worried about immigration and its effect on our communities. But we as a party and as a government will absolutely be judged on our ability to solve this problem over the coming years. I know the Minister in her place agrees with this wholeheartedly, and we will stand by it. We will be judged on our ability to solve this problem. But reading the Conservative motion in front of us today feels rather like the arsonist turning up and complaining that we haven't yet put the fire out. It's a motion that I'm sure the Reform Party will support if any of them can be bothered to turn up, given its entirely vacuous nature and total absence of any policy solutions. And I want to talk, if I may, briefly about legal migration, because this is something that exercises me and I know many of my constituents hugely. Under the Conservative government, I will give way in a moment, under the last Conservative government, they put construction workers on their points-based immigration system. They wanted to import construction workers, the people we need to rebuild this country, from abroad, while my FE college, that trains local Hartlepoolians in construction skills, had its funding cut by 10%. This is nothing short of economic vandalism. Vandalism that threw constituents of mine on the scrap heap for far too long, and it is their legacy. Now, I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you for giving way. The honourable member just referred to the government as being the equivalent of the fire brigade turning up to put out a fire. Given the government's track record since coming into office, would he agree that it would be fair to say that they brought petroleum to put out the fire, not water?
Yeah, as I say, again, after 14 years, they turn up demanding to know why nobody's done anything about it in 10 months. Frankly, it's just hypocrisy of the highest level. Now, I want to turn very briefly, if I can, to the comments that have been made around the Rwanda scheme and illegal migration, their much touted Rwanda scheme. Time and time again, we hear the same tired lines. It was just about to work. If only we'd had a little longer, it would have solved all the problems of the small boats. Well, I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, they had the time. They chose to call the early general election. Indeed. They could have waited. If they truly believed in this scheme, this totemic flagship of theirs, they would have backed themselves. But they didn't, because they knew it was a busted flush. They knew it was going to fail, and they rushed to the country before that failure could be fully exposed. And how did we get to this point in the small boats crisis, central to a lot of what we are talking about today? Because there were no small boat arrivals recorded before 2018. Why? Because at that time, the UK had a returns agreement with the EU, making that dangerous crossing, anyone making that dangerous crossing could be returned. But the Conservative Brexit deal didn't put a returns agreement in it. The same Brexit deal championed by the Reform Party is the reason that we are here today with the numbers that we are seeing today. The Honourable Member for Clacton, not in his place, championed that deal and now uses the numbers it caused as a weaponised political choice. I'll happily give way on that point.
The honourable gentleman references a returns agreement with France. In the Labour Party amendment to today's motion, it talks about a deal with France. Does he have confidence that the French will agree to take illegal migrants back from the UK?
The reality is that before 2018, we had that agreement. We've had it before, and we will This Prime Minister has shown time and time again his ability to negotiate on the world stage, and I have total confidence that he will. Indeed, I have to say the only surrender that's taken place this week is the surrender of the Honourable Member for Clacton and his sun lounger. As a direct result of the failure of the Conservative Party to get a returns agreement in their Brexit deal, we have seen the numbers explode. But progress is being made. The asylum backlog is now down 32% from its record high under the last government. In Hartlepool, a town unfairly targeted with disproportionate dispersal accommodation, we now have a freeze on any new asylum accommodation and a clear target set to reduce numbers. But let us be clear, the numbers are still too high. That's why the passage of the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill is absolutely essential. It gives us the ability to utilise counter-terrorism powers to pursue and dismantle the criminal gangs that facilitate these crossings. The powers the parties opposite voted against. But I do believe we have to go further. We must tighten the use of Article 8 of the ECHR to ensure it cannot be misused, so that it is this House, not the courts, that decide who stays and who is deported. And I place on record now that any foreign criminal in this country should be deported. And we must strike agreements with international partners so that those people coming on boats can be swiftly returned, because that is the true deterrent. This will not be achieved with Tory gimmicks, nor will it be achieved with reform slogans, but through detailed policy, focused diplomacy and the hard graft that this Labour government has already begun. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is about time that members opposite stopped playing politics with this issue. That is what the people of Hartlepool expect, and it's what the government must do. And as long as I am in this place, I will hold them account to do it.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There has been too much immigration into this country for far too long. And I have great regard, by the way, for the Minister, as she knows, but regard allows for sharp disagreement. And if she didn't know we disagree, she will after this speech. Because, you see, that level of immigration has damaged our economy. It's damaged our shared sense of belonging, on which social cohesion depends. And it's damaged our public services by increasing population at an unsustainable level. Let me first turn to the economy. The effect of mass migration on the economy has been to displace investment in domestic skills, in recruitment and retention of labour. It has displaced investment in the modernisation of our economy, and it has therefore damaged productivity. It has inhibited productivity. What essentially we've created is an economy which is low-skilled, which is dependent on the provision of relatively cheap labour, and which therefore is unfit to compete in a high-tech, high-skilled world. Yes. That's what it's done to our economy. For the evidence, one only has to look at the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee, which found, and I quote, "There is no evidence for the argument made by government, business and many others that net immigration, i.e. immigration minus emigration, generates significant economic benefits for the existing UK population." And the reason for that is 70% of migrants are in low and medium-skilled roles. This is not the brightest and the best. This is not the people that we need to fill vacancies that can't be filled. It essentially means filling those vacancies rather than providing opportunities for the vast majority of those Britons that can't get a place in the labour market. It has certainly damaged social cohesion. And it has done that by undermining our shared sense of belonging. You simply can't import that number of people, many of whom, by the way, don't speak English as their first language, without significant investment in integration. And even if we were integrating at pace, the sheer volume would make it impossible to hold many of those communities together. We've seen social fracture with the risk of complete fragmentation in many communities. Members of this House, across the House, would have gone to schools where the head teacher has said proudly, "Oh, of course they speak 15 different languages here," as though that was a cause of celebration. Without a common language, there can be no currency for learning about one another. There can be no means by which we can share what makes us British. We have to promote the English language, and we should abolish any attempts, by the way, by any authority to translate things into foreign languages. Let's make that a call, a rallying cry from today. And finally, on population. The population of this country is growing at an unsustainable rate. We've heard already that on successive governments, and it is successive governments, beginning with the Blair government, and then Tory governments, and coalition governments, and now this government, I'm sorry to say, have failed to recognise that if you increase the net population by 700 to 900,000 a year, this is the combined population, by the way, of Cambridge, Norwich, Hull, Lincoln, 5 cities, if you like. I will happily give way.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable member knows I hold him in high regard, but he mentioned the figures of 800 to 900,000 following his list of governments. Can he confirm those figures only ever happened under a Conservative government?
I did say that it was under successive governments, and the reason that is, by the way, I don't count him amongst them, but the liberal elite of this country that controls far too much of the establishment and wields too much power is at odds with the understanding which prevails in his constituency and mine of ordinary, everyday working people who recognise what I've just said long ago. Quite right. But were told by people who should have known better that net migration at that level was not only tolerable, but was desirable. It is a complete nonsense to pretend so, and every piece of analysis justifies that. I happily give way to mine.
I thank my right honourable friend and neighbour for giving way. And will he recognise that this concern with the high levels of immigration is as much an issue of democracy and a sense of people not being heard? And I noted the comments from the member for Hartlepool in terms of his support for deportations of foreign-born criminals. But unless the government uses levers, such as on visas, for those countries not taking people back, then we again will see too many foreign-born criminals in our prisons and they're not being deported back to their native country.
Well, I of course agree with my right honourable friend, as usual, brought a particular insight based on his long experience to our consideration. So let's just take one example of that. 647 migrants received health and care visas from 2021 to June 2024. 270,000 of them were workers. An extraordinary, outrageous 377,000 were dependents. And even the Liberal Democrat benches, even those remaining members of the Liberal elite who still perpetuate the conspiracy of silence about these matters, must understand that everyone who comes to the country brings an economic value and an economic cost. And many of those dependents won't have brought economic value. That's not to disparage them in any way. They're perfectly nice people, I'm sure. But they're not adding to the economy, and certainly they're not adding to the per capita productivity or growth in the economy. In fact, they are detracting from it. I will happily give way to it.
Thank you very much to the honourable gentleman for giving way. He speaks of the liberal elite. I think he's been quite generous there to a guy who was state educated. I am very much just a bloke, but I thank him. One thing the Liberals were elite at was pointing out the fact that Brexit was not going to work. And the promise of Brexit, of course, was to take back control of our borders. What does he make of the fact that immigration is now 4 times higher than it was in 2019 following his own government?
Well, of course, Brexit, and particularly free movement, led to a massive influx of people. When David Blunkett, now Lord Blunkett, in the other place, was Home Secretary, he estimated as a result of free movement, 13,000 people would arrive in this country. In fact, it was hundreds of thousands, and when settled status was granted, it turned out to be millions. So the honourable member is quite wrong about the effects of Brexit. Well, I won't because I know others want to get in, and I'm already testing the Deputy Speaker's patience. The truth of the matter is that we need to address migration, not only for the reasons I've given about population growth, the damage to social cohesion and the economy, because unless we do so, the British people will assume, and rightly so, that people here just don't get it. Well, I do, and I hope my front bench now does, and the government need to wake up and smell the coffee pretty soon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Immigration is a part of Britain's history, and we have a proud record of supporting those seeking refuge from across the world. British life has been enriched by people that have come from across the globe, made their lives here, contributing to the NHS, the business sector, local communities and our economy. However, as it stands now, the situation we inherited with our immigration and asylum system after years of neglect was not fit for purpose. And today, due to time constraints, I'll particularly focus on border security and asylum, because it goes without saying that border security is national security, and that our asylum system can only work if it is well managed and well regulated. Indeed, over the last 6 years, criminal smuggling gangs have been allowed to take hold along all of our borders, making millions out of small boat crossings and exploiting some of the most vulnerable people, whilst they've gone virtually unchallenged. We've had the expensive rhetoric from the Tories, and I'm sorry to say that they practically collapsed the asylum decision-making system, relying on the Rwanda scheme that was simply a gimmick. They hemorrhaged an eye-watering £700 million of taxpayers' money on a system which we all know wouldn't work, and indeed didn't. And so today I think it is important to shine a light on what this government is doing, with legislation introduced on the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill, which will put national security back at the heart of our border system. It will give law enforcement agencies counter-terror-style powers and actually deal with the criminal smuggling gangs, which the parties opposite voted against. We'll have tougher border security. I'm not taking interventions. You've had 14 years to intervene, thank you. Tougher border security measures for foreign national sex offenders who will be excluded from refugee protections, new powers on seizing electronic devices, new offences against gang selling and handling small boat parts, new and modernised biometric checks overseas to build a clear picture of individuals coming to the UK and prevent those with a criminal history from entering. We've got new agreements with France, Germany, Italy and Iraq on tackling these gangs, and our agreement with France will mean that policing units will have the authority to intercept boats in shallow waters. We've announced a £150 million funding package for a border security command, unlocking new surveillance technology and new additional funding for the National Crime Agency. Whether it's through the Border Security and Asylum Bill or through the workings of the immigration white paper that we announced recently, we are finally, after many years, getting to grips with the system, making it fair and humane, but also putting in the graft to make sure that there are laws and safeguards in place so we don't find ourselves in this mess ever again and that our national security is not put at risk. No more rhetoric or gimmicks, but meaningful action. A government that is actually governing, facing up to the problem, getting it sorted, which is what my constituents in Doncaster Central and people across the country expect.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Nobody ever voted for mass immigration. The country has repeatedly said it wants border security, very little immigration, and deportations for those who break the law. Yet mass immigration is what successive governments have imposed on our country, and human rights laws, which render border security and immigration control almost impossible, are treated like untouchable, unchangeable, holy scripture. The justifications for mass immigration have changed over the years. First, people were told the numbers were small and nothing much would change. Next, people were told immigrants would integrate and there was nothing for them to worry about. Then people were told multiculturalism was a gift, and things like foreign foods made it all worthwhile. More recently, as the numbers became unimaginable, and communal intimidation and violence and sectarian politics and even terrorism became, in the words of Labour's London Mayor, part and parcel of living in a big city, people are now told to keep their views to themselves and parrot the official line instead. But diversity is not our strength. It is a very serious and difficult challenge we have to manage, thanks to policies imposed on the public by politicians who chose arrogantly and callously to ignore what the people of their country wanted. Britain's true strengths, if you want to give way, you can. Britain's true strengths are our long stability, our legal inheritance, our institutions, our language, our shared identity forged through the triumphs and tragedies of history, the places we have in common, our literature, our culture, and yes, even our food. While politicians have talked vague nonsense for years about British values, sometimes values that could equally said to be French or Dutch, the honourable gentleman is entitled to give way, but he continues to abuse from a sedentary position, as indeed have various members on the benches opposite. It's supposed to be a debate. I will happily give way to it.
The honourable gentleman served as the Chief of Staff to Baroness May, who at the time was both the Home Secretary and Prime Minister at different points. Is he honestly saying that he doesn't bear a single piece of responsibility for the situation we find ourselves in today, given that he was at the heart of policy making when this all went terribly?
When I worked in the Home Office for the first couple of years, net migration fell, and after that it rose. And this party, like the party opposite, has failed the public on immigration. I am happy to accept that. The people on the benches opposite show no sign of any contrition or any sign of learning anything from experience. While politicians have talked vague nonsense for years about British values, sometimes values that could equally said to be French or Dutch or whatever, and sometimes values not even shared by many British people, the constituent pieces that add up to our shared identity and culture are precious, because without our shared identity, there's less social trust, little solidarity, and less willingness to compromise and make sacrifices for one another. It is undeniable that mass immigration and the radical diversity it's brought has undermined that shared national identity. And what of the justifications for this massive social change? We've been told for years that it's vital for our economy. But mass immigration has displaced British workers from their jobs and undercut wages. The zealots who still support mass immigration will no doubt scoff that I'm guilty of the lump of labour fallacy. But if I am, so is the Migration Advisory Committee and various immigration experts. The only fallacy is believing that importing millions of fiscally negative immigrants will make us richer. A fallacy now enshrined in Whitehall policy through the Office for Budget Responsibility, which insists, I'll get to the end of my sentence and I will, which insists immigration creates fiscal headroom without calculating, as the Danish Finance Ministry does, the true long-term fiscal cost of immigration by national background of migrants. I will now give way, unlike the Immigration Minister when she was going on.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making a very important speech. My honourable friend, a member for South Holland and the Deepings, talked earlier about the 5 cities worth of people that were being brought into the country. What that essentially means is we have to build 5 more cities to accommodate those people who are coming into the country. Has that not increased the house prices and in fact made many young people poorer and find it more difficult to get on the housing ladder?
Indeed, I remember when Dominic Raab was the housing minister and he made this point, the response from the party opposite was one of sheer hysteria and accusations of bigotry. My honourable friend is completely right. Mass immigration has also killed labour market pressures for employers to invest in skills and training, labour-saving technology and the pay and conditions of their workers. Then there is the capital stock of the country. When our population increases at the kind of speed we've experienced, what do we expect to happen? There are fewer hospitals and surgeries, trains and road space, flats and houses, police officers and prison spaces per person than before. And let us dwell for a moment on the social problems we've created for ourselves. According to the census, there are 6 London boroughs where a majority of people were born abroad. In towns and cities across the country, the census shows you can draw a line where on one side live the white British population and on the other side lives an Asian Muslim population. The reasons that this should alarm us ought not to need spelling out. And we are importing many of the world's hatreds. Just look at the Saturday marches against Israel and the intimidation of Jewish communities. Look at the riots we saw in Leicester 3 years ago. So when the Prime Minister referred to an island of strangers, he was not wrong, even if the Immigration Minister didn't back him up in using that language in her speech. The pity is that the policy response is risible. From Tony Blair to Boris Johnson, we've seen successive governments talk tough only to deliver ultra-liberal immigration policies. Yes, this is the point, and they still won't learn. And this government is pursuing the same cynical path. The policies are pathetic. They cannot even tell us if indefinite leave to remain changes will apply to immigrants already in the country. We know Labour lack what it takes to drastically cut the number of people coming into the country, nor remove all the people who are here who break the law, claim benefits, or take out more than they put in. So I hope, and I believe, my party has rediscovered the necessary steel. The future of our country will depend on it.
White. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There was a court case yesterday where people smuggler known as Captain Ebid was jailed for his part in coordinating and managing the small boat crossings of over 3,000 people. A ruthless man who treated human life as rubbish, ordering the murder of migrants and happily bribing officials to pursue his financial objectives. This man was smuggling across the Mediterranean, but his methods mirror that of the criminal gangs who are bringing people across the English Channel. My question to the opposition is, why was he here living in asylum accommodation when he was arrested in 2023? He had previously served a prison sentence in Italy for drug smuggling, and yet he was never deported despite having a prison sentence. This is why I welcome the Borders Bill that not only will give us... Of course.
For giving way. Will she agree with me that when we came into government there were over 18,000 foreign national offenders living in our communities who should have been deported and hadn't? When we left office in 2010, that number was 4,000.
Joe White. Thank you very much, Minister, for making that very key point. The British people were let down by the opposition when they're in government. And it's why I welcome the Borders Bill, because it gives us the powers to pursue those people, both here in our country, but across the borders to their origins. And we, in government, will never allow people with criminal records to be considered for asylum. The previous government allowed the backlog of asylum seekers to rise to over 80,000, housing them in hotels across the country, and when that became too embarrassing, they tried to hide them away by putting them on a disease-ridden barge, buying disused army bases at huge expense, and setting up a dispersal process with houses being purchased across the country. It's only this government that has tackled this head-on. Over 24,000 people have now been returned, 23 hotels have been closed, and I want more. My constituents demand more, and I will keep coming to this House to ensure that we get more. We must get the Borders Bill into law, and smash the gangs is critical. Reform and the Tories keep voting against the bill, whilst repeatedly offering no viable alternatives. There is only one party that can be trusted to secure our border, and I will back the government.
Heath Wishart.
Ever so much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say I was quite amazed and surprised to see the Conservatives bringing forward a motion on immigration in the Order paper today, because I think for most of this House, all that we require from the Conservatives is a fulsome and sincere apology for the mess and chaos that they left behind, and then to go away for a long period of self-ordained silence. I mean, they actually thought they were reducing immigration, but what they did was they quadrupled it. They didn't even understand their own immigration policy, that were letting hundreds of thousands of people come into this country. So please do not get to your feet and have the temerity to lecture this House about immigration after the mess that you made. Now,
the honourable gentleman did rather incite me to get to my feet, and I am somewhat stunned at his allegations that I have any part in it. But Pete Wishart.
That is not like me, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's very lapsed, and I do apologise for that. Now, the Conservatives are currently languishing in fourth place in the opinion polls, and it's a well-deserved position for them.
Yes. That's very kind.
Cameron Thomas.
Thank you very much. I've decided to make this intervention from the Reform bench in the absence of apparently any of their own interest in immigration. Another thing that I think the Conservative Party might answer for is that Vladimir Putin weaponised immigration in 2015 through his terrorist tactics in Syria. And I wonder if the Conservative Party has given much thought to how the Conservative Friends of Russia group continued to operate for almost a decade thereafter.
I have to say to the honourable gentleman, I don't think the Conservatives give much thought to anything in this particular field, and so I wouldn't even venture into making some sort of opinion of that. But as I was saying, they're in fourth place. Their whole vote is practically gone whole scale to reform. And this scrappy, desperate motion is just some sort of vain attempt to try and stop that leakage and get some of that vote back. Can I say to the honourable gentleman, it doesn't matter how hard they try, and they are trying. They will never out-reform reform. They are the masters in nasty rhetoric, and they are but mere amateurs compared to the honourable gentleman who just don't so happen to be in the place again. Now, the whole debate about immigration is now descending into an ugly place, which seems to just fire the obnoxious and the unpleasant. And it's not just these two parties, it's them too. And I'm going to lay my blame at some of the things that they're doing, because there is a new consensus emerging in this House. For all of their faux arguments, for all of their fabricated disagreements, they are now more or less united in a new anti-immigrant landscape that has taken place in this House. The only thing that seems to separate all these three parties is just about who could be the hardest and the toughest in this grotesque race to the bottom on asylum, refugees and immigration. The fear of reform percolates through every sinew in this House. It dominates every single debate. And while they're at it just now, it's reform that dominates everything that's going on. So they're killing the Conservatives, but Labour seem to want to get into a little bit of the self-destruction action themselves. Everything that they do is now look through a reform prism when it comes to immigration. And they've even started to get the Prime Minister to use their language. The member for Clacton couldn't have been more generous in his tribute to the Prime Minister for his contribution to nasty rhetoric. And the thing is, the island of stranger speech could have been made by any single one of these three parties. Of course, I always give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. Just to reassure him, Madam Speaker, I haven't changed my mind about this. I believe this forever. I only change my mind about anything about once a decade. But the truth of the matter is he must know that the scale of population growth, according to the ONS, will be the equivalent to the population of Edinburgh, Glasgow, Leeds, Leicester, Liverpool, Newcastle, Peterborough, Belfast, Cardiff, Manchester, Ipswich, Norwich, Luton and Bradford added together, and that cannot be reconciled with the quality of life and the standard of living that his constituents and mine expect.
And I know the honourable member does not change his mind, and it's something we love him for in this place. But can I just say to him, maybe look forward a couple of decades, because what's on its way, and I think the honourable gentleman knows this, is spectacular population decline that starts to kick in about the part of the century. Already Spain and Italy are doing something about this. All we're doing in this place is stifling population growth because of the two-child benefit cap, something that works contrary to what we actually require. But all Labour is doing is climbing upon the anti-immigrant bandwagon, and what they're doing by this is alienating their own supporters. Now, I'm sure everybody saw the Sky News report this morning on the intention of former Labour voters. And what Sky News found is that only 6% of lost Labour voters have gone to reform. And Labour have mainly lost votes to the Liberal Democrats and to the parties of the left. In fact, Labour have lost 3 times as many voters to the Liberals and the left than they have to reform. And 70% of Labour voters are considering abandoning the Labour Party to support the parties of the left. Chasing reform, I can't give away anymore, chasing reform voters by using the language and appeasing reform is only further alienating their own support. And you can only but wonder at the political genius that is Morgan McSweeney, that he's managed to chase voters away in the search for voters that don't exist. Now, I think ordinary Labour voters, I can't give away, I've got no time. Ordinary Labour voters have good liberal values, but what they've got just now is a party that is not representing their views, and that is why they're moving on. Now, in Scotland, we take them on. We're one of the few parties across the United Kingdom that steadied their position and increasing it even slightly. We've got a big gap between us and reform. That is because we take on their arguments and we do not appease them and go on to their agenda. And I encourage the Labour colleagues to just think about that. And what we've got, though, is now an immigration policy that is the exact opposite of what we need in Scotland and is contrary to our national interests. We in Scotland are at the early stages of this population and demographic crisis, which is only going to get worse because of what this government is going to impose upon us. We will soon have too few working-age people available to look after an ever-increasing older population. For them, for all of these 3 parties, immigration is a burden, and to them it is out of control. For us in Scotland, it is essential for the health of our workforce and our economy. That is why we will never stop calling for a separate Scottish visa. We need the tools in our country to face up to our crisis. Now, I'm going to leave them to get on with their grotesque race to the bottom about how best they could pander to reform in order to try in vain to make sure they get some sort of votes. But please, Scotland does not need their new island of strangers policy. It is contrary to what we want, so please leave us right out of it.
With an immediate 4-minute time limit, Conor Naismith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the brass neck of the Conservative opposition to come to this place, member after member, standing up and talking as if they are commentators, completely ignoring their role in the previous 14 years, where their record on immigration was appalling. It started with David Cameron, who promised to get migration down to the tens of thousands, followed by a conveyor belt of Prime Ministers and Home Secretaries who ratcheted up the rhetoric almost as high as the number of people coming into this country. Finally, we saw the Boris wave, which saw net migration almost hit 1 million. And I have to say that when I was listening to the member opposite talk about the Liberal elite, I wondered if he was referring to Boris Johnson, because it was on his watch that happened. Boris's betrayal perhaps being the worst, given that he led a campaign on Brexit that famously centred on control of our borders. Now, their 14 years in power begs the question, if they want a binding cap on migration, who on earth would trust them to keep to it? There is a strong case for control over legal migration, and I wholeheartedly welcome the steps outlined in the Immigration White Paper last week, which I believe will contribute towards that aim. My constituents do not object to people from around the world coming to this country to contribute to our economy and enrich our culture. We have a proud history of that. However, that must be carefully balanced against preventing exploitative labour market practices that create a race to the bottom on pay and conditions in crucial sectors such as health and social care, as well as the need to build strong, united and integrated communities. Now let me turn to the issue of small boats. Firstly, go for it. Yeah.
Acknowledge, and I take his point, that, as I did say, successive governments are to blame for this, beginning with the Blair government, perhaps even earlier. But would he also acknowledge that you can't increase the population at the scale we have without putting unbearable pressure on housing demand, on demand for access to GPs and health services and other public services?
Naismith.
This government is committed to bringing the numbers down, but the honourable gentleman regretfully forgets the role of austerity in putting pressure on public services, on housing and all of those other things that he mentioned. So, turning to the issue of small boats, firstly I want to acknowledge that this country has a proud history of providing refuge to people fleeing persecution, and I believe that most people believe in those traditions. But this should not be determined by one's ability to cross a continent or pay huge sums of money to people smugglers in order to do so. What we need, quite simply, is fairness and control. That's why I welcome steps the government has taken to speed up processing, disrupt the smuggling gangs and work alongside our international allies, who the previous government, unfortunately, spent a lot of their time alienating. No, I'm not going to give away, I'm going to make progress. The Rwanda plan was quite simply a joke. And I think the Tories take my constituents for fools. It cost them £700 million and they only sent 4 volunteers. But the party opposite shockingly still think it just needed more time. The Right Honourable Member for Richmond and Northallerton, the former Prime Minister, staked his entire reputation and electoral fortunes on stopping the boats. If the Rwanda plan was going to work, why did he call a premature election in the rain outside Downing Street rather than from an airport hangar? Because he knew that the plan was not going to work. Why would he do that? I'll give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. He is my neighbour in Cheshire, and I note to his views on the last government's record, but can he explain how Labour's decision just 20 days after the election to suspend the Illegal Migration Act, which would have rightly prevented illegal migrants from claiming asylum or gaining British citizenship, sends anything other than completely the wrong message and undermines public confidence in the immigration system?
Well, I mean, quite simply, my experience talking to voters, if we're talking about public confidence, the public had no confidence in the Rwanda plan. Everybody saw that it was not going to work, so the government was absolutely right to cancel it. The answer is that just like my Labour colleagues and millions of voters, the previous government knew that it was going to fail. These issues are of crucial importance to my constituents, and I will continue to push the government to do more to control our borders. But simply, it will not happen by slogans or press releases. It will happen through the hard yards of good policy making, and I'm pleased to see that this work is well underway.
Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It doesn't matter how many times the Prime Minister repeats and repeats his vacuous election slogan of smash the gangs. There is no plan to do it. It's not happening, and nobody out there believes him. They had an opportunity when they came to office. The Rwanda scheme was on the brink of becoming operational, which would have given the government one of the most robust deterrents in Europe. As we saw in Australia, when they set up a similar scheme to Rwanda in the Pacific, they only had to deport the first few thousand, and it already had the impact of largely stopping the boats arriving. But in a callous and irresponsible and purely political move, Labour cancelled the Rwanda scheme. It is a political calculation they've got entirely wrong, as everything else they announce or say without a deterrent is just words. They've had nearly a year to show us they had more up their sleeve on immigration than buzzwords and crocodile-teared outrage about the scheme. So how's that going? Since the election, almost 36,000 illegal immigrants crossed the Channel. That is a 30% increase on the same period 12 months prior. This year to date, 2025, has been the worst ever year for small boat crossings, with around 12,000 arrivals. This surge in numbers has led to Labour already breaking their manifesto promise to end the use of asylum hotels. And figures show that on the 31st of December 2024, there were 8,000 more people in asylum hotels than when the Conservatives left office. The government has been clutching at straws for good news. They started off by holding a press conference to celebrate the arrest of one member of just one gang out of the thousands of criminals involved in the illegal immigration trade, to show they were smashing the gangs. If that wasn't enough of a laughable spectacle in its own right, the investigation had mainly been undertaken before they came to office, and these arrests are a matter of course anyway. More recently, they have switched to triumphantly claiming 24,000 deportations. But time and again, even at PMQs today, the Prime Minister refused to outline how many of those are just routine and voluntary removals, rather than enforced deportations from people who have illegally crossed the Channel. I'll give way to my honourable member from Lancashire.
Ryan. Thank the honourable member very much. Speaking of voluntary removals and laughable schemes, as he did earlier, does he accept that the 4 people that he and his government at the time sent to Rwanda were in fact volunteers, and that the whole scheme was laughable and hideously expensive?
Andrew Stone.
The scheme wasn't even operational. That's like buying a car, waiting until it gets to the showroom and then claiming that only the showroom managers drive it, so it wasn't worth the money. It's a ridiculous thing to say. Vacuous slogans, empty words, quite apt, cooked-up stats, and a Prime Minister unable to answer the most basic of questions. The Prime Minister is now reduced to not only begging other countries to give him options to provide a safe country to deport to, he's publicly getting slapped down by the leaders he is asking. And these returns hubs he is so desperately trying to set up now are only a watered-down version of the Rwanda scheme. But even more worryingly is not only that, having shot themselves in the foot by cancelling Rwanda, in launching their new border security bill, they haven't realised that without a deterrent, it's all just words. I will give way.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable member. I wonder whether he can address the point that I made in my speech repeatedly, including in his own speech. Conservative members have said, if we had only waited a little bit longer, Rwanda would have worked. Why do you think it was that the honourable member for Richmond called the general election? I apologise, Madam Deputy Speaker. Why does the honourable member think it was that the honourable member for Richmond called the general election when he was so close to that Rwanda scheme apparently working?
Thank you very much for the intervention. You'll have to ask the honourable member for Richmond. Sorry. The honourable member, it's the flavour of the day, would have to ask the honourable member for Richmond. And it is only a tangible element of the bill that has been introduced, a border security commander with no actual powers other than writing a report and setting some objectives, and new powers to confiscate phones from people who arrive illegally, missing the fact that most of them disguise their phones to hide their identity anyway. Also, notably, it repeals lots of the Illegal Migration Act, therefore lifting the requirement for the government to remove people who arrive here illegally and allowing illegal migrants a path to citizenship. Let's be clear, there should be no route to citizenship for anyone who arrives in this country illegally. France is a safe country, and to get to France, let alone the UK, people will have had to pass through many other safe countries. Everyone who arrives across the Channel in small boats or in lorries from the continent is arriving from a safe country and should therefore qualify to be immediately deported. These are not asylum claims, it is illegal immigration. As much as I would like to take up all of this debate and more talking about the ludicrously weak and counterproductive policies of this government, by the time I'd finished, that many more small boats would have crossed the Channel. I'd rather spare the Minister the time and hope they spend it instead correcting some of the mistakes. And some of the provisions that we outlined in the bill which would help this are disapplying the Human Rights Act from immigration matters, a requirement to deport all foreign criminals regardless of human rights claims, an introduction of a scientific age assessment technique when a legal migrant is trying to pretend they're over 18, a requirement to impose visa sanctions on countries who do not take back their own citizens, and increasing from 5 to 10 years the period to qualify for indefinite leave to remain are just some of the measures. However, I live in hope for the sake of our national security, the confidence of the British public in our immigration system, and to reduce the strain on our public services, that the Prime Minister picks up the phone to his opposite number in Rwanda, apologises for the totally disrespectful way he treated their country, and beg them to get the deal back on the table. But I think it will take a few more years of repeating empty slogans, dodging any difficult questions, holding press conferences every time there is an arrest of a single person of the thousands that are involved in the illegal immigration trade, before the Prime Minister realises he isn't smashing the gangs, he is making everything worse, and it's time to pick up the phone again to Rwanda.
Oliver Ryan.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the opposition motion, which I won't be supporting, uses the word regret an awful lot, but it omits any regret from their own side, from their complete failure to properly secure our borders for 14 years of government. They ran an experiment in this country, and they'll never be forgiven for it, especially for facing both ways for such a long period of time on the immigration question. In 2010, the Tories pledged to get immigration down to the tens of thousands, and over that 5 years, they failed. In 2015, the Tories said they would get net migration to the tens, not the hundreds of thousands, and they failed. In 2017, they said they would get migration to tens, not the hundreds of thousands, and they failed. In 2019, they said the numbers will come down, because at that point, Madam Speaker, they'd panicked slightly about the whole affair. But at the time they were leaving office, net migration to this country was nearly 1 million people. Time after time, for 14 years, they told the British people they would tackle migration, net migration, and bring the numbers down. But they didn't. And now, after 10 months, they've got the bottle to stand in front of this government and say, why are the numbers not down yet? We're taking action to bring the numbers closer to the approximately 200,000 that they were when Labour left office in 2010. This rhetoric that it's been an issue for 30 or 40 years, the numbers have been sky high over the last 10 years, really since Brexit. And they wonder why people think they're irrelevant. Now, there's mention in the motion of a cap. But as always with this opposition, there is a history lesson here. I'm old enough to remember 2013, 14, 15 and the cap that was announced by the coalition as a very junior councillor, and the cap that was mentioned by the coalition then, a complete chocolate fireguard at the time. They announced the cap, they got the headlines, it failed to do the job, they ditched the cap, and then it wasn't worth the press release it was written on in the end. It was game playing to the highest order, and we're seeing the same thing again now. History is repeating itself. Now, net migration quadrupled in the last 4 years, and our asylum system was completely destroyed. The processing of asylum claims took so long, and numbers increased so much, they were spending £9 million a day on hotel stays in over 400 hotels. Hotel stays, for my constituents, are a treat, and not something to be doled out to people coming off boats in the Channel, and unfortunately that's what they did for the best part of 5 years. My constituents don't begrudge genuine asylum seekers, but that system was broken, and my constituents have told me that that just isn't on. Boats over the Channel were basically invented by the last government. Indeed, when the Shadow Home Secretary was Immigration Minister, as we've heard, in his last 5 months, 13,500 people crossed the Channel in small boats. 260 boats in his last 2 months as Immigration Minister. 260 have in fact crossed the Channel in the last 6 months of this government. I would say that's progress, Madam Deputy Speaker. But let me say now, Madam Deputy Speaker, and briefly, if you are here in this country illegally, and illegal is illegal, then you will be removed. That is not in contention. I don't see how it is. In contrast to those years of open borders, and I'll try and be brief on time, this government has secured agreements with France, Germany, Italy, Iraq and more. Game-changing arrangements with France and Germany in particular, and I want to see French boats in the water, stopping those asylum seekers in the months to come, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll finish there because I'm very short on time, but thank you very much.
Which brings us to the front bench contributions. Shadow Minister Katie Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As my right honourable friend, the Shadow Home Secretary, very rightly said earlier this afternoon, migration has been too high for decades and remains so. In every year since 1997, with the unsurprising exception of 2020, net migration was over 100,000 people. Every election-winning manifesto since 1974 has promised to reduce migration. Successive governments of both parties have promised to end the era of mass migration and control the borders, and successive governments have failed. In the words of my right honourable friend, the member for North West Essex, the last government, like the governments before them, also promised to do exactly this. But again, like the governments before them, it did not deliver. I am afraid that this government is just the latest addition to this rogues gallery of broken promises. And worse than disregarding the public's wishes, public servants have told the British people to ignore what they can see and feel around them. The public was told that migration would deliver growth. It has not. Instead, people can feel their wages stagnating because they are being undercut. They can see the pressure of mass migration in their soaring rents, in how hard it is for their children to get on the housing ladder, in the cohesion of their communities and the pressure on their GPs, dentists and schools. In the words of my honourable friend, the member for West Suffolk, immigration is the biggest broken promise in British politics and probably the biggest single reason that British politics is so broken. I will make a little progress and then come back to you. Fixing this broken system is the single biggest thing that we can do to restore trust in our politics. That means control of the borders, an end to mass migration, and its replacement with a system that works in the interests of this country and its people. Those who have come here legally and not contributed enough should be made to leave. Those who are here illegally, either from crossing the channel or overstaying their visas, must be removed. The era of taxpayers funding accommodation, education, healthcare and legal challenges against their own government for those who have no right to be here must end forever.
I want to play honourable family way.
I give way on this.
On that very point.
So, John
So
Hay.
we should deport the approximately 1 million people that are here illegally. We also need, as I hope she will acknowledge, to look at the indefinite right to remain. There are all kinds of people who have been granted that status with extremely dubious pasts, presents and possibly futures. Will she commit the opposition to re-look at that? Because indefinite doesn't mean permanent.
Katie Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his intervention. We already have committed to and will continue to commit to that. It is a clear amendment both to the Borders Bill and to the Deportation Bill laid in the name of my right honourable friend, the Shadow Home Secretary. Unless and until we, politicians of all stripes, can deliver the migration system that the British people have voted for time and again, there will be no reason for them to trust in our political system, and they will be right not to. We have seen no indication from this government since they came to power last year that they are willing to do what needs to be done to give the British people the immigration system they want and deserve. And the debate today, I'm afraid, has been no different. The Minister clearly wished only to speak about the record of the last government. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, they are in charge now. And what do we see? My right honourable friend, the Shadow Home Secretary, points out the facts. He says Afghans are 20 times more likely to be sex offenders. They say outrageous. Well, it is outrageous. Saying so is not. He points out that over 70% of Somalis live in social housing. They call it race baiting. This is exactly the attitude that has allowed our political class to ignore the reality of the world that we live in. No party and no government that continues to treat the British public's very legitimate concerns with such scorn will ever rise to meet the challenge of securing our border. The honourable member for Surrey Heath called for more safe and legal routes, but demand to come to Britain will always dramatically outstrip supply. There is no number of safe and legal routes that will ever stop people making the dangerous channel crossing. The member for Hartlepool called for this House, not foreign courts, to decide who can stay in this country. I admire his stance and I look forward to the launch of his campaign to leave the ECHR. My right honourable friend, the member for South Holland and the Deepings, made a characteristically insightful speech about the substantial challenges of integration and rightly connected this to the volume of immigration. No country of our size could ever hope to integrate this many people each year, and he is right to say so. I give way.
Deputy Speaker, I think it's possibly in order that I correct the honourable member who's just spoken. My point was very clear that I believe that the application of Article 8 should be tightened so that it's not courts in this country who are sovereign over this place that are stopping deportations. It should be this place that ensures deportations.
Katie Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the member for his clarification. I hate to break it to him that Article 8 will not do what he thinks it will, and tightening it will not solve the problem. The biggest article that presents problems actually is Article 3, which does not have caveats and cannot be tightened in the way that he is talking about. The honourable member for Doncaster Central spoke of border security as national security. She is correct to do so, and yet just last week, when told in this chamber that terrorists come across the channel in small boats, her colleagues on the government benches laughed and jeered. My right honourable friend, the member for West Suffolk, as ever, made a compelling economic and cultural case for control. The honourable member for Bassetlaw, not in her place, I don't think, set out some of the worst problems of the current immigration system, but it was perhaps not entirely forthcoming the way that she shared those statistics. Far from closing asylum hotels, there are 8,000 more people in asylum hotels than when Labour came to power. The honourable member for Perth and Kinross-shire and I have aired our differing views on this topic over many weeks over the Borders Bill. I'm not sure either of us has done much to persuade the other, but I always enjoy his company and I give way to my honourable friend.
Very grateful to the Shadow Minister giving way. The then Leader of the Opposition in 2020, as point 6 of his plan under Another Future is Possible, said Yarwood's detention centre would close. To my knowledge, as of today, it is still open. Given her experience, is she aware that Yarwood is going to be closing? Has she heard the government commit to do so? And if so, when?
Katie Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I can only recommend that he does not hold his breath. And I was grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Fylde, who mentioned what needs to be done on age assessments, and the amendments that we have laid in this House, I think, would make much progress on that. Last week, the Prime Minister said that mass migration risked turning us into an island of strangers. He was absolutely right. He recognised, as we recognise, that fixing migration is the single most important thing that his government can do to restore trust in our politics. And yet the plan that he presented, the government's migration white paper, is not a plan to end mass migration or to control our borders. It is a plan for more of the same. Instead of a detailed programme, the government's white paper offers more delays, more reviews, more consultations and more half measures. Their plan to deport foreign criminals, subject to a consultation later this year. Their plan to reform the rules on settlement, another consultation. When given the chance, they voted against a hard cap on visas, against our plan to disapply the Human Rights Act from immigration cases, and against our plan to restrict long-term settlement to those who contribute enough to cover their costs. They are just not serious. The Home Secretary estimates that their plan will cut migration by 50,000 people. Against the context of hundreds of thousands a year, this is just not enough. The government has no plan to remove the 1.2 million people here illegally and no real plan to restrict study or family visas, which made up 40% of all migration last year. If we thought the government's plans would genuinely end mass migration and control our borders, we would support them in a heartbeat. The need to do what's right for our country is bigger than any single party, politician or Prime Minister. But unfortunately, this government has no plan. It will go down as the latest government which failed to fix mass migration. This is the most shameful betrayal of public trust in British politics, and it must end. But this Labour government shows no sign that it will do what needs to be done.
Malhotra. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's a pleasure to respond to this important debate, which I welcome because it is time to restore control over the UK's immigration system. And coincidentally, that is actually the title of this 76-page white paper, which is a serious plan and one, frankly, that the party opposite should have thought more about bringing forward when they were in government. And let me just first reassert the fundamental point that my right honourable friend made in her opening speech, which is that this government is picking up the pieces after years of chaos and dysfunction. The party opposite can talk all they want, but they cannot rewrite history, Madam Deputy Speaker, when it comes to small boats. The worst day, the worst week, the worst month and the worst year all took place under their watch in 2022 after the Rwanda deal had been signed. They gave us record net migration. They gave us record small boat arrivals. They gave us record numbers of asylum hotels. So we will take no lectures from them. Now, it bears repeating because what we inherited was, by every possible measure, a failing system. Net migration had risen to record levels, driven in large part by overseas recruitment. Despite the public being assured that it would come down, as order and control utterly vanished from the legal immigration system, as net migration quadrupled in recent years to record highs. And this was at the same time as investment in training went down. Total investment in training per employee fell by 19% in the decade to 2022. And it is this government, in our spring statement, that announced £625 million to go towards skills training. These were important points made by honourable members across the House, including my honourable friend, the member for Hartlepool. But I do also want to pay tribute to the honourable member for South Holland and the Deepings for talking about this issue. And indeed, there's a debate about whether it's cause or consequence. But what is clear is that we cannot deny, as, for example, with engineering, that apprenticeships halved while visas doubled under their watch. There is a serious issue that this white paper is tackling, and I would urge the party opposite to actually engage with the substance of this white paper on some very serious reforms that we need to make in our country. Now, this dramatic increase has had serious and far-reaching implications across a range of areas, from public services to community cohesion, from housing stock to the economy and to our domestic labour market. But perhaps most damagingly of all, Madam Deputy Speaker, it has badly dented the confidence of our constituents who want to see an immigration system that is fair, that is controlled and that is managed. And they want to see opportunity for themselves and for their families. Migration is an important part of our national story, and none of us should deny that, because for generations people from all over the world have come to Britain to live, to study and to work. From members of the Windrush generation who helped rebuild our country following the Second World War, to the doctors and nurses working in our NHS. Indeed, they enrich our society and culture, as my honourable friend, the member for Crewe and Nantwich, also outlined. But recognising the value and contribution of legal migration is not the same as having no controls, because for far too long a persistent and abject failure to exert control has undermined the system with grave consequences. This is the situation we inherited on legal migration, and it is an important debate that we must now have about why that's been the case and what we must do to bring it down. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the picture on illegal migration and border security was no better. Small boat crossings grew in number from a few hundred in 2018 to tens of thousands under the party opposite. Hotel use peaked. There were 56,000 asylum seekers in 400 hotels in the autumn of 2023, when the Shadow Home Secretary was at the Home Office. I'm giving my way to...
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. One issue that has not been touched upon in this debate is that there's not just an issue with asylum seekers in hotels, but asylum seekers in HMOs, which is causing a lot of community cohesion problems where unscrupulous landlords are buying up HMOs in cheap terraced housing in the towns and villages of County Durham. Would she accept that that's also a problem that rose and rose under the previous government?
Seaman Malhotra.
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend for raising that point, and that is indeed an issue, and that my honourable friend is working on and working with local authorities on, indeed, so that there are caps and that we have a process that is well managed. I will give way. I'll just make some progress first. But the issue here is that as the UK has also come to be seen, we've come to be seen as an easy target by criminal smuggling gangs who relentlessly undermined our border security and put lives at risk in the Channel and elsewhere, the consequences of which we have also tragically seen again today. And this cannot go on, Madam Deputy Speaker, and under this government it won't. We have restarted asylum decision-making with the horrendous backlogs that were left by the previous government. Returns are up by 21% to over 24,000 returned. And indeed, the Honourable Member for Fylde raised the question of those who have been having had enforced returns. The number is actually up significantly on the previous year, and he may want to engage with those figures and indeed the record of his own government on this. And that's why we have taken action through the new Border Security Command, the Border Security and Asylum and Immigration Bill and the Immigration White Paper to act. I just want to make some more progress. To act to restore order and control to the immigration system and to give law enforcement the powers they need, powers that parties opposite voted against. Now, in the Immigration White Paper, we have laid out a set of robust measures, including reversing the long-term trend of increasing international recruitment at the expense of skills and training. We want to see net migration come down by investing in training. And for the first time, the Labour Market Evidence Group will be established, drawing on the best data available to make informed decisions about the state of the labour market and the role that different policies should play, rather than always relying on migration. Immigration must also work for the whole of the UK, and I know the Honourable Member for Perth and Kinross-shire. We have been in a number of debates on the needs of Scotland, but I will say to him that departments across government will be engaging in the new Labour Market Evidence Group, along with the devolved governments and sector bodies, as part of this new approach. We will also tackle the overly complex family and private life immigration arrangements where too many cases are treated as exceptional in the absence of a clear framework. That's why legislation will be brought forward to make clear that it is government and Parliament who decides who should have the right to remain in the UK. This will address cases where Article 8 right to family life legal arguments are being used to frustrate deportation where removal is clearly in the national interest.
Joy Morrissey. The question is that the question be now put. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. I think the ayes have it. Aye. Aye. Scream now. Aye. Aye. Division, clear the lobby. Well, okay. No. Okay, we'll do it on the voices. Right. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many as that opinion say aye.
Oh my
Of the
God.
contrary, no.
No!
Division, clear the lobby. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many are as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Jerome Mayhew and Andrew Snowden. The tellers for the noes, Anna Turley and Keir Mather.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 83. The noes to the left, 267.
The ayes to the right were 83. The noes to the left, 267. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. The question is that the proposed words be there added. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. I declare the question as amended to be agreed to.